Hello everyone, wishing you all a wonderful day. Today, we're uncovering a shocking twist. The moment Yuri discovers that the project he proudly earned was actually bought by his own mother. What will he do when the truth shatters everything he believed in? If you enjoy this video, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next episodes. For several weeks, Yuri lived inside a whirlwind that seemed to revolve only around his first official project. The moment he signed the contract, everything else faded into the background. His days were spent drafting, revising, redrafting, and jumping between endless calls. When night came, he didn't slow down. He simply switched on another lamp and kept going. It was exhausting, yes, but it was the kind of exhaustion that felt meaningful. For the first time in a long time, Yuri felt like he was building something that belonged entirely to him. And through all of it, Tu Tieu quietly became the backbone he didn't even know he needed. She didn't nag, didn't lecture, didn't tell him to rest every hour. Instead, she supported him in ways that never demanded attention. Placing a warm drink by his elbow, slipping a blanket over his shoulders when he stayed up too late, brushing his hair back when he leaned too close to the computer. She watched his small victories with proud eyes, and every time he doubted himself, she reminded him gently, "You're doing great. Keep going." Yuri didn't always say it out loud, but her belief in him meant everything. But unknown to both of them, while Yuri was pouring his heart into the work, something else was moving behind the scenes. Quietly, invisibly, and dangerously. One evening, while Yuri was reviewing some documents in the living room, the doorbell rang. He barely looked up, buried deep in numbers and notes. Tu Tieu wiped her hands on a towel and walked over to the door, expecting a late-night delivery. But when she opened it, she froze. Standing outside was Truong. He wasn't a man of many words. He had always been a silent guardian of their extended family, someone who cared deeply but expressed almost nothing. He helped when asked, protected when necessary, and rarely visited unless something was seriously wrong. "Truong," Tu Tieu said, surprised. "What brings you here this late?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he glanced past her shoulder and saw Yuri sitting at the table. The look in his eyes shifted, heavy, troubled, almost reluctant. When he spoke, his voice was low. "I need to talk to Yuri. It's important." Something in his tone made her chest tighten, but she nodded and stepped aside. "Yuri? Truong is here." Yuri finally looked up, expecting small talk, maybe a quick check-in. But the expression on Truong's face wiped away any hint of casual greeting. Yuri stood, concern rising. "What's going on? You look like you're about to give me terrible news." For a moment, Truong didn't speak. He seemed to struggle with the right words. Something very unlike him. When he finally exhaled, it was heavy. "Yuri, there's something you need to know about your project." Yuri frowned. "What do you mean? Everything is fine. The client even praised my work last week." But Truong didn't blink or break eye contact. His tone remained calm, but there was an unmistakable weight behind his words. "That project wasn't accepted because of your proposal." Everything went still. Yuri's expression emptied, as if his mind couldn't process the sentence quickly enough. "What?" Truong continued softly. "I've been keeping a close eye on things lately, just making sure no one interferes with your business. And I found out something you deserve to know." Yuri's shoulders stiffened. "The client received a large sum of money the day before they signed your contract." The words hit him like cold water, A bribe? Yuri whispered. Truong nodded slowly. And the money came from your mother, from Mrs. Nghia. The silence that followed was suffocating. Even the air felt heavier. Tu Tieu gasped softly behind them, hand over her mouth, but Yuri didn't react. He stood utterly frozen. No, he whispered. She wouldn't do that. She wouldn't. But even as he said it, there was doubt. Raw, painful doubt breaking through his voice. Truong stepped closer, speaking gently. She wasn't trying to hurt you, Yuri. She thought she was helping. She thought she was protecting you. Yuri's fists curled at his sides. His voice cracked as he spoke. Helping? By buying my success? By making me believe I earned something I didn't? He paced across the room, shaking with disbelief and anger. I worked night after night, thinking I finally made it, thinking someone finally recognized me. And now what? It wasn't my work. It was her money. His breath trembled, his frustration spilling out uncontrollably. I told her I wanted to do this on my own. Truong stayed silent, letting Yuri release everything. When the storm finally slowed, he said softly, I thought you deserved the truth. Yuri swallowed hard, forcing himself to steady. I need answers. Without another word, he grabbed his coat and walked out the door, leaving behind the warmth of home and the stunned quiet that followed his exit. When he arrived at his mother's house, the lights were still on. Mrs. Nghia sat on the sofa, reading a book. Her face brightened when she saw him. Yuri, you're home late. Come sit. Did you bribe them? His words sliced through the air. Her smile faded instantly. Yuri, let me explain. Did you use money to buy my project? He repeated, voice trembling with betrayal. She lowered her gaze, her hands tightening around the book. You were struggling, she said quietly. You were tired, stressed, losing hope. I couldn't watch you suffer anymore. I'm your mother. I just wanted to help. Yuri felt the floor drop beneath him. I needed you to trust me, he said, voice breaking. Not interfere, not fix everything the moment it gets hard. I do trust you, she insisted, tears forming. But the world is harsh. People don't care how talented you are. I just wanted to give you a chance. A chance built on bribery, he said bitterly. A chance that didn't belong to me. Her voice shook. Everything I did was because I love you. And you hurt me, he whispered, more than failure ever could. The room fell silent, painful, heavy, and full of everything neither of them knew how to say. When Yuri stepped out of his mother's house, the cold night felt sharper than before, almost as if the air itself carried the weight of everything he had just learned. The street was quiet, but inside his mind, thoughts clashed loudly. Anger, disappointment, sadness, and a kind of emptiness he didn't know how to describe. He walked without direction, letting the silence soak into him, until eventually his feet led him back home. The lights were still on. Through the window, he could see the silhouette of Tu Tieu sitting by the glass, waiting. The moment he opened the door, she stood up, her expression soft but filled with worry. Yuri, she whispered, stepping toward him carefully, like someone approaching a wound that might reopen at the slightest touch. He didn't speak at first. He just let the door fall shut behind him, shoulders heavy, eyes tired. Did you talk to her? She asked gently. He nodded, and even though the gesture was small, it carried layers of exhaustion. She meant well, he said slowly, but she didn't trust me. Not enough to let me fight on my own. His voice cracked halfway through, and that was all it took. Tu Tieu, wrapped her arms around him, pulling him against her chest. This time, he didn't resist. He simply let himself collapse into her warmth, hiding his face in her shoulder. She held him tightly, one hand stroking the back of his head, whispering softly, "She's a mother. Sometimes love shows up in the wrong way. Sometimes it hurts, even when they think they're protecting you." Yuri breathed shakily, his chest trembling. "I wanted this so badly," he admitted, voice barely above a whisper. "And now it feels meaningless, like none of it was really mine." She pulled back just enough to cup his face in both her hands. "Look at me," she said firmly. When he finally lifted his eyes, she held his gaze with unwavering clarity. "You worked hard. Every idea, every late night, every moment you doubted yourself but kept going. That was you. Money didn't create your talent. Money didn't create your passion." He swallowed, trying to steady himself. "But the contract isn't the end," she said. "If they accepted you once, you can make someone accept you again. And next time, it will be because they genuinely see what you're capable of." Her voice was calm but strong. And for the first time that night, Yuri felt something inside him settle. She leaned her forehead against his, grounding him. "You don't need shortcuts," she whispered. "You just need to believe in the person you already are." He closed his eyes, breathing deeply as he held on to her, letting her presence steady him. And in that quiet moment, the emotional chaos that had consumed him slowly began to fade, replaced by something steadier, a flicker of determination. By the next morning, that flicker had grown. Yuri sat at the kitchen table, a cup of coffee warming his hands. He stared at his laptop for a long moment, the fear returning in small waves. Fear that maybe he wasn't good enough, that maybe his mother did what she did because she believed he couldn't succeed without help. But then he remembered the nights he pushed through exhaustion, the ideas he fought for, the improvements he made. And he remembered the look in Tu Tieu's eyes when she told him he was enough. So he opened a blank document. Not the old project, not the corrupted contract, a fresh start. Slowly, he began typing. The rhythm was awkward at first, but soon ideas flowed naturally, purely, freely. For the first time in weeks, he wasn't writing to prove anything to anyone. He was writing because he loved it. Tu Tieu peeked from the doorway, watching silently. She didn't say a word. She simply smiled, then walked away, letting him create without interruption. Hours later, a quiet knock came at the door. When Tu Tieu opened it, she found Truong standing outside. His expression was calmer today, thoughtful rather than heavy. "Is Yuri home?" he asked. Yuri stepped into view. "I'm here." Truong studied him for a moment. "How are you holding up?" Yuri took a breath. "Still processing, but better." Truong nodded. "I didn't tell you to hurt you. I told you because you needed to know the truth." "I know," Yuri replied softly. "Thank you." After a moment of silence, Truong added, "You're talented, Yuri. Anyone who's seen your work knows that. Don't let this make you doubt yourself." Something warm flickered in Yuri's chest. "I won't." "Good," Truong said. "If you ever need support, the real kind, not shortcuts, I'm here." Yuri smiled for the first time that day. "I appreciate that." When Truong left, the house fell quiet again. Later that evening, Yuri and Tu Tieu sat on the balcony, legs touching, watching the city lights shimmer below them. The night breeze was gentle, carrying away the heaviness piece by piece. "You know," Yuri said quietly, "I always thought success had to come fast, that if I didn't make it quickly, It meant I wasn't good enough. Tu Tieu leaned her head against his shoulder. Real success takes time. The things you earn slowly, those are the things that stay with you. Yuri stared at the skyline, absorbing her words. I want to build something real this time. No shortcuts. No one interfering. Just me. Then do it, she said softly. You already started today? He turned to look at her, gratitude softening his expression. I don't think I could have gotten through this without you. She smiled, brushing her fingers against his hand. You didn't get through it because of me. You got through it because you're stronger than you think. He slid his fingers between hers. Maybe, but it's easier with you here. The city lights flickered like distant stars, and for the first time since the truth shattered his pride, Yuri felt hope rising again, quiet, steady, and real. He didn't know what the future would look like. He didn't know how many failures or successes waited ahead, but he knew one thing with absolute certainty. He would earn his future with his own hands, his own talent, his own hard work. No more shadows behind his achievements. No more invisible strings pulling him forward. Just Yuri, determined, passionate, and finally standing on ground that truly belonged to him. And with Tu Tieu beside him, he knew he would never face any of it alone. This episode follows Yuri at a turning point in his life. After years of struggling to prove himself, he finally believes he has earned a major breakthrough, a prestigious project that could define his future. But everything collapses when Truong, the quiet guardian who has always watched over Tu Tieu and Yuri's families, reveals a painful truth. The project wasn't awarded because of Yuri's talent, but because his mother, Mrs. Ngia, secretly paid for it. Shocked and devastated, Yuri feels betrayed by the very person he trusted most. As he confronts the truth, his confidence wavers, his pride shatters, and his relationship with Tu Tieu becomes fragile. The episode dives deep into guilt, love, and the emotional conflict between wanting success and wanting to deserve it, forcing Yuri to decide who he wants to become next.